host David Paulman, and helping me host today we have Travis on. Travis has been on the show a couple times already, debating, but I think this is his first time hosting. So how you doing, Travis?
Hey, David, how's it going?
Going great, man. All right, so we're doing a discussion on eschatology today. Always a controversial point in Christian theology, but a fun one, and so I hope that the discussion is going to be educational, but as well as Christ-like today, and so that really looking forward to it. So I think we got three views getting presented here. We've got Justin Simpson. He's going to be doing
hmm
premillennialism. So how you doing, Justin? Good to have you on the show.
Pretty good, pretty good.
All right.
Sorry if I'm making faces and look like I'm asleep. I'm in some kind of autoimmune attack, but it's all good.
Oh, I'm
Oh, I'm
sorry
so
to hear that.
sorry. Mm,
All right. Well, if you gotta like go for something, just feel free to let us know.
I should be good. That's why I have the blanket too.
mm.
All right. Also joining us, we've got Dale Glover on here. He's going to be representing Amillennialism. So how are you doing, Dale?
Hey, David. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And then finally, we've got Toby Isaacson. I think I said that right. Presenting Preterism. How are you doing, Toby?
Yeah, said that right. Nice to be on. Nice to meet you all.
Likewise.
All right. So, Travis, I'm going to turn this over to you. Let you explain how the format is going to go down, and then we're going to jump right into the openings here, which I'll let you get into all that. But just the order here, we've got Justin. He's going to be presenting first. Then we're going to have Dale. Then we're going to have Toby. And as we get into questions and issues like that, then we'll just kind of keep that same order just to keep things simpler. So tell us how this debate or this discussion is going to go, Travis.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. So basically, what we're going to be doing is 5 minute openings a piece to kind of lay out your position, like, let us know some of the details. And then we're going to transition it to like a 30 to 45 minute discussion. David and I might pose questions to the panel, and the three of you discuss it. And then there's going to be 3 minute closings apiece.
All right, well, then I think we're just going to open it right up here then, and we're going to begin with the first opening statement. So it's over to you, Justin.
All right, how's the sound?
Good.
Sound? Does anybody else have bad sound from David and freeze framing?
I did to start with, yes.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, y'all two, Travis and Toby are the only ones I can see besides David. Just I don't know if I'm supposed to see the other guy, but either way, it's fine.
Yeah, and Justin, I can hear you great. I think David might have like a little bit of a bad connection.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. All right. Since it was mainly framed as a debate, I just did my opening as just like I try to just get right to it. And personally, before I start, maybe it started whatever, but I thrive in the discussion and question. That's my favorite part, and I feel like I thrive. So. The 1,000-year reign must be terrestrial for both believers and Jesus himself. The throne of David is not in heaven. The apostles and even the OT saints haven't been resurrected yet for them to sit on the 12 thrones when Jesus sits on his glorious throne in the regeneration. Satan and his hosts, they must not be here. And, personal testimony doesn't count, but it's worldwide. But I've dealt with demonic forces directly. They're definitely here. They're not chained up in any shape, form, or fashion, which Peter tells us. Like I said, Satan and his hosts, they must not be here. The mark of the beast must have already come. The fullness of the Gentiles must have already come in. And the partial hardening of Israel lifted by the Redeemer coming from Zion, as it says, the hardening still exists. So does the hatred of them, the ones who are partially hardened, whom the gifts and the callings of God to are irrevocable. And these very ones in Romans 11, these reject the gospel, say they are not believing Israel or Gentiles grafted in, being the Israel of God. It's impossible for that to be the case. you would have the if we were in the millennial reign, you would have the nations terrestrially on the earth, and you would have these nations sending representatives themselves to worship the King, the Lord of Hosts, as it says in Zechariah 14, on the Feast of Tabernacles, which another translation is a Feast of Booths. We don't have that. And if you want to say they would go up to Jerusalem to present themselves to worship the King of Hosts. That's what the nations will do in the millennium. And if you want to say it's the New Jerusalem, then it's still terrestrial and comes from God out of heaven to the earth. And the nations that do not go up will be punished. And as we can see, that's not happening at all. And if the resurrection hasn't happened, which the Bible only gives two sequentially, there's the first resurrection, and then you have the one after when the 1,000 years are completed, then the mark of the beast. If the resurrection happened, then the mark of the beast hasn't happened, because the people, the specific, not only but specific people mentioned in the first resurrection, overcame the beast, and they were killed by him in specific ways. And we can see that that hasn't happened. And the terrestrial bodily reign of the saints and Jesus himself would have already started. And Jesus is not here terrestrially. And Jesus did not return in 70 AD for any reason. He tells his own people who reject him when he will be back in Luke 13 and Matthew 23. So real quick, the context for that is when he rode in on the donkey, as was prophesied, the people that accepted him then said, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, right? And many of them did not. So that is the blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So in Luke 13 talks about this, but in Matthew 23, Jesus is real specific to the Jews that reject him, specifically to Jerusalem. He says, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And as we can see, the hardened, partial hardened Israel who still rejects the gospel, they have not said, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They're still waiting for a Messiah and unfortunately deceived in many other ways. And they're under Deuteronomy punishments from God until that time, until Jacob's final trouble. And then the last thing is this generation is not allowed to be interpreted to advocate for the 70 AD, any kind of return for Jesus, because of intertextuality. That's the number one reason, is intertextuality. It doesn't allow for all the things in Matthew 24 to have happened yet. And that's the types of things I can talk about and go into. Thank you.
Okay, sounds great. So next I'm going to be kicking it over to Toby for a 5-minute opening, who's going to be defending partial preterism. So we'll start at your first word.
Sure. So we call it partial preterism. This is kind of my version of it, which is based around looking more traditionally at the Jewish eschatology first, and taking their kind of 7 specific things that they were looking for in their language. So when they said latter days, when latter days was used in a lot of the early New Testament writings, they were kind of referring more particularly to the Jewish terms latter days in that eschatology, which is that one, they would undergo tribulation, which is primarily consisting of exile, and they would have felt, even though they were in their home country, they would have felt like they were in exile because there's a pagan power over them. So although it would have still felt like an exile to them, because the pagan power was essentially occupying their space. So they weren't fully there, and they weren't in control of their own nation. So when they are living in Rome, and with a Roman rule over that country, they would have felt like they were in exile, even though they were in their own homeland. So they would have understood that first tribulation point and the false teaching and deception and persecution, everything under that framework. that would also mean that because they are under this tribulation, under this exile that they believe that they are experiencing, that they would then seek the Lord and will be delivered, and their enemies will be judged, which you see in primarily, you can probably pick that out from Ezekiel 38. Daniel 7 has a big part to play in that, and kind of the latter chapters of Daniel as well. Once that has happened, so this deliverance and judgment will take place because they're messiahs. They're looking for a messiah from Israel who would actually conquer the pagan empire that had taken them into exile. So they're looking for that specific, and it was considered to be a military leader, but it, as we can see from the way that Jesus portrayed himself as the Messiah, it was so much more than that, and the military element, or the victory that we see from the battle that he took on, was so much more than merely something that we might consider a military power today, or even they might have thought of then. And interesting, as a side point, they had a couple of Messiah figures, as it were, before that tried to, and were partially successful in trying to overthrow the Roman Empire and the Roman rule over Israel. So they were thinking that this is a messianic activity, but that obviously failed, and the Romans took back control, or they killed the Messiah before they had a chance, which is kind of where Jesus comes in as yet another, maybe they killed the Messiah, which we'll get to. They would have also understood that as part of this latter days, the resurrection of the dead, so they were looking for the literal resurrection of Israel, all those that had died, Old Testament prophets, and all those that were faithful, and that God would actually establish his new covenant with Israel, which is what you see in primarily Jeremiah 31, around this new covenant. I will write my law in their hearts, and so on. And then, because he has resurrected the dead and he has established a new covenant with Israel, God would then establish a kingdom on the earth and rule over it. And you would see that described again, it comes out of Daniel, and there would be a Davidic king, which comes out of Hosea. And then out of that, because Israel was called as a blessing to the nations, that you would then see some of the Gentiles would actually come into the Israel nation as well. So that's what they were looking for in the latter days. That's what they were looking for. And actually, we can see a lot of that fulfillment in the story of Jesus and how he lived out and talked about what was going on in the latter days. And actually, I think one of the main points that I will start with when we talk about Jesus, so if we look at the eschatology of the New Testament, they are looking in that framework. The first thing that Jesus' followers thought was that Jesus wasn't going to die. They never expected him to die. So when he's talking about when I return, that was not when I return after I've resurrected and ascended into heaven and come back again. That was when I return because I'm going to die and I have to come back. So actually his going away initially was his death, and that death on the cross, which started everything, was in essence that beginning of the defeat of evil, the reign of the Son of David alongside God on the thrones that were established. And we can talk about Daniel 7 more. I think that's probably one of the key passages here. But actually, when we look through a lot of the way that Jesus talked about what he was accomplishing, we can see that most of the Jewish latter days, the Old Testament latter days that we're talking about, were coming to fulfillment in the lifetime of the New Testament church. They could see all of these things coming about. The messianic prophecies were being fulfilled, that they could see this new kingdom was being established. The new temple, Jesus established himself as the temple over against the building. He said that he was the temple, and so the new temple was being built, which we then see with the church is then taking on the temple structure after that, and that he had essentially defeated evil, and that all evil had been defeated on the cross. And so we then see the first, and it's probably where I'll stop, so that because I know that we have time limits, is we see the first fruits of the resurrection of the dead. They were expecting the resurrection And so we start with Jesus as the first resurrection of the dead to show us the prototype of what we will be expecting when the fullness comes. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks so much, Toby. So now we're going to kick it over to Dale, who's going to be representing, I believe, Amillennialism. So, Dale, I'll start the 5 minutes whenever you speak your first word, man.
Awesome. All right. So thank you so much for having me on the show. Just a quick note for the audience and the guys here. I apologize if I fall a little bit short, because I wasn't an expert in eschatology before this show at all. I didn't really know which position I was. So I think so yeah, just in terms of the position, so amillennialism is the position that says there is no literal 1,000 year period where Jesus reigns. That's a symbol. And I think it's just important to understand a little bit, okay, what does the Bible teach about the nature of the second coming? So on that front, I think it teaches, number one, the classical view is that the second coming will be a personal coming of Jesus. The Bible seems to indicate that should be singular and visible. The return of Christ will also be glorious. It will be a decisive event in human history, so it's the termination of it. That we get that from 1 Corinthians 15, 22 to 24, for example. And then finally, it'll be a sudden and unexpected event, and we get that from Matthew 24. In terms of the purposes, just kind of going through that, as I said, it completes the work of redemption and brings human history to a close. The second coming, so that'll be the time of the general resurrection, when we get our resurrected, glorified bodies, just like Jesus had as the first fruits. And at that time, Jesus will be judging all the people of the earth. And then finally, the purpose of the second coming is to gather his church. So how does that relate to amillennialism? So I think there are certain reasons why I would take this position. So reason number one, let me just scan down. So the first one here is kind of a note of caution. So there's only really one passage in the Bible that speaks of this, right? Revelation chapter 20. So at the very least, that should put us on edge. It's a book that's apocalyptic literature that has a lot of symbolic language in it. And then secondly, so Scripture also teaches that, I think it teaches there's only going to be one general resurrection. The other views, like premillennialism, for example, or if you take a preterist view or a rapture view, they almost imply that there's two resurrections that come about at different times and that sort of thing. And I don't think that's what Scripture teaches. Number three, there's a problematic notion of, okay, sinners will be living alongside glorified, resurrected people, and that seems a little odd to think of, especially if you believe in the quarantine view of hell. Why the heck would we have to quarantine if there's no issue with sinful people living alongside saved people in the final state? Another last thing here is, it makes the millennium serve no purpose. What is the purpose of that millennium? Why not just go straight to the end? And that seems to be what the Bible presupposes, that he's going to come in the blink of an eye and take over. He's going to reign supremely and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's sort of my position in a nutshell.
Okay, sounds good. So I guess now we're going to transition into the open conversation. Now, there's a few areas we could kind of touch on, but I was kind of thinking of the last point. Maybe we could start off discussing, like, what is the purpose of the 1,000-year reign of Christ? If you guys want to start that, we could kind of go starting, with Justin and then Toby and then Dale, or however you guys want to do it.
Sure.
Ready? Audio good?
All good?
All right. That's something I've spent a decent amount of time on, and I don't know what you would call the formula for reasoning. I probably need to lay it out more, but the scriptures give you that people survive the second coming, and we can tell that there are Israelites, the ones who see him when he comes back and he turns ungodliness from Jacob finally, and then there's no more ethnic Israel that's unbelieving. That makes perfect sense with the partial hardening being lifted. So we know that we can reasonably and logically conclude that those people are not resurrected. You can try to say, well, they are, but you don't. It doesn't give you that. So those at the minimum, and you have passages in Isaiah about people living longer and the way they die and things like that. And then, another thing, though, this is totally me, but I believe you can deduce this, is that there will be people below the age of accountability that do not get destroyed in the second coming. So, having said that, what you have is you have unregenerate, regular people that have not had a bodily resurrection. And once you have new birth, you have people new and not knowing anything, and those people are in the millennium. And obviously, if that's the case, the way soteriology will work is going to be totally different, assuming that Jesus is there on the throne of David. There's a totally new institution of things, et cetera, et cetera. But my final point on that is that you can get from the Gog and Magog, there's two invasions. You can get the Gog and Magog, from Gog and Magog, and the things that I said, that there is still sin in the millennial reign. I'm sure it'll be dealt with in different ways. It's a totally different, I don't know if dispensation is the right word. And so the main purpose of the millennium is to get sin out of the human race. And it takes time to do that. And that, of course, depends on if people enter into the millennium with regular bodies and grow and have to learn about God and stuff like that. Those people still have to have because they don't have redeemed bodies, and it takes time for God to get the sin out of the entire creation. And that's another reason why the second resurrection, the last and final resurrection, is at the end, and that's why all the unbelieving dead that have ever lived are judged at the same time. Because at that point, after that, there's not going to be any more. All you can assume, and I don't see anything contrary, all you can assume is there's not going to be any more evil after that. That's when, over time, evil will be totally worked out of the human race. And, it could go on assuming about when procreation stops and talk about Revelation 21 and the restoration of Eden, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so Toby, what's your take on the millennial reign?
So I would, and I'm probably going to fall naturally more under the Dale amillennial position than a premillennial for obvious reasons. So Dale, if I stab on your toes, I'm very sorry. But
no worries, I'll forgive you this one.
But I think when you look at Revelation 20, which is, as Dale's already said, it's the only passage that actually talks specifically about 1,000-year reign of Jesus. Although 1,000 years, if you look at Hebrew scriptures, 1,000 years was the longest imaginable period of time that they had. So they thought or used the term 1,000 years to mean this is a really long time we don't know the end of. It's going to be an indefinite. We'll only have either the letters written by the apostles that are writing to them and the theology that's taught to them. And if they had scriptures to turn to, they would turn to the Jewish scriptures because Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. So they would be using those scriptures to search out meaning. And so they would have this same knowledge of that kind of language. So 1,000 years, Hebrew, 1,000 years is an indeterminate amount of time. it's a very long time, and so it doesn't say there will be 1,000 years in the sense of 1,000 years. There will be 1,000 years instead of this 1,000-year period, which is obviously the way that I would read Revelation. Is it is all pictorial, or a lot of it is very, very pictorial and very metaphorical, partly because John is taken up into the heavenly realm where he's trying to describe heaven to people who have never been there. So there's a lot of pictorial language, and so we have this picture of this 1,000-year reign where we see, obviously, and I think the description that Justin gave isn't inaccurate in the sense that there's this still, there's going to be sin going on, there's going to be people coming to Christ, because this is the reign of Christ. Christ is reigning right now in the heavenly realm. And when we look at that same passage when it's talking about the first resurrection, I think I mentioned it in the opening kind of statement, is that first resurrection was the resurrection of Jesus. And anyone, as Paul writes in his letters, anyone that believes in Jesus gets to share in his resurrection. So they take part ahead of time through baptism in his resurrection. So they become part of that first resurrection, which means they are then part of those people that are reigning with Christ. And I guess there's this clash of terminology, which, if you look at how the Jews saw heaven and earth, it wasn't heaven is up there and earth is down here, and we go up to heaven to see some things, and then we come back down to earth, and there's this kind of gap. Actually, the way that they saw heaven and earth is that they were very much coexisting and kind of interlaced with each other. Most heavily, you would see that in the temple, where that is the place where heaven and earth meet, and that's where you go into the temple to meet with the ruler of heaven and earth, namely God. So when Jesus becomes the temple, that's when the rule of heaven starts to break out into the earth in its fullness. And so you start to see that the presence of God, presence of Jesus on the earth, and the rule and reign of Jesus on the earth is finally now the New Testament church, which is living out across the world, which is where I would kind of begin to explain how I would talk about this millennial reign of Christ, which I believe is still ongoing.
Okay, sounds good. So I guess we'll hear from Dale, and then I was thinking maybe we could kind of interact with each other's comments, maybe offer a critique, and maybe explain why your particular position may be more plausible than the other, and so forth. So Dale, if you want to go ahead, and then I guess we'll start interacting with each other's comments.
All right. So thank you, Toby, for firmly stepping on all my toes. But I agree with a lot of what he said. So I think just to quickly recap, there is this notion of the already but not yet aspect of the kingdom of God and that sort of thing. So obviously, it was inaugurated with Jesus, his first coming, and at his second coming, that's when that's going to be the decisive blow, the end of human history. He's going to do away with sin, subjugate all the enemies of God and that sort of thing. So that's what I think is really going on. We have to keep that in mind here. And I think it's at the second coming that there's this once for all general resurrection that's going to take place. This notion that there are multiple resurrections or multiple comings, one that's invisible versus, just one single out of nowhere visible second coming. Those are kind of problematic on the premillennialist view and stuff like that. So I'm done.
Okay, so I guess we'll go to Justin, and then we'll kind of just like open it up for you three to just conversate.
I was finishing writing something. So let me go back to. It's just going to kind of be random. But the heaven and the earth combined doesn't present any kind of problems for premillennialism at all. I mean, I would love to have someone expound on that. And I see a major problem with making the first resurrection, and I've seen it before in these debates, because you have it's like a chain, where all these things connect. If you believe this, then you have to believe this, such and such and such and such. And so I see people saying, mostly full preterists, saying that the first resurrection is non-terrestrial. And if you read, I'll follow up with the point. If you read Revelation 20 and how it's worded, and interpret it and read it properly, it's obviously terrestrial. It's a later event from a spiritual resurrection on the inside. And sorry, I lost my train of thought on that one. But the having it be non-terrestrial. Oh, and that's the other point that I believe my opponents have hinted to, is something I would hope they would consider. Is I think a lot of times your view, and it can happen to me too, and feel free to point it out, but your view is going to make you in certain ways. It's going to make you think a certain way, and I'll make a pretty bold claim. I believe, especially post-millennialism, but also amillennialism, it forces you to have kind of the subjective placement of symbology and allegory. And so you're inadvertently saying, oh, well, this is just spiritual. And if you look at it, a lot of things, like this is an example, a lot of those things hang on that. Oh, well, this is just, this is symbolic, this is allegorical. But, one of the things I've spent some time doing is looking at the texts, talk about intertextuality, and, David would probably understand this. There's got to be a way to, because David reads a lot of books about thinking, which is awesome. And there's got to be a way, there's got to be a logical rule that governs when, why, and how for placing a symbolic or allegorical explanation on certain things. Let's see what else I wrote down. And I agree. He was talking about I would say the New Testament is a Jewish-centered text, but I think it's written in such a way from the Jewish background, and Jewish understanding, which I agree, but it's incorporated in, with the Gentiles. So I think, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you weren't making this point or antithesis, but I think that's sufficient for during the millennial reign. And obviously, if it's the case, it would be a looking back thing. And let's see, what else did I write? Oh, and then visibility of the two resurrections, because you have a sequential, however you interpret 1,000 years, you have a sequential, that's the key, you have a sequential separation of the two resurrections. So you have the first resurrection, then you have all the criteria, the people connected to it, and then sequentially you have after the 1,000 years is completed, and it goes on, says all these different things. The rest of the dead, and you have a kind of a up to that point finality. You have the rest of the dead, and so the visibility. I don't know. I think it's inconsequential. The second resurrection. So I don't see the invisibility of the second resurrection at the end of the 1,000 years, where, like I was saying, according to the view I take, all the unbelieving dead that have ever lived are judged at that time. That's some of the things I wrote down for right now.
Cool.
Okay, so did you guys want to respond, or if not, there's like another topic we can get into as well, but I'm sure you guys wanted to respond.
Dale, do you want to go first, just in case?
Okay. Yeah, sure. No worries about that. Okay, so yeah, it was interesting. Thank you for that. And as I said, there has to be humbleness because I've just got a very basic understanding compared to you two guys. This isn't something I've looked hardcore into. But it was interesting about the visibility is just inconsequential to you. But I think that that's something that's very important from what the New Testament teaches us about the nature of the general resurrection. So I'm not sure like why you just think it's no big deal so long as there's this invisible resurrection and then there's sequentially the visible one. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Finish. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to get your sort of take on that because you responded to that point.
It appears that I'd like to believe I understood what you said when you first said it, and I wrote it, but it could be. It appears that I may be misunderstanding what you're saying. The problem with that is with the invisibility of the resurrection. So tell me what you think the problem is with that again. So then it'll force me to go back deeper, and then we'll work our way out.
So yeah, I'm scrolling, trying to find my notes here, but basically, I think it's just that notion is inconsistent with what the Bible teaches us about what will happen in the end. I think that they seem to be saying that there's only this one event, and that is definitely the visible one.
Who's saying that?
In the Bible. So I think that's the stuff that we get from like. Mark.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah.
As far as that point, well, I think logically and very reasonably, when we have first language for a reason, so it obviously it definitely implies another or a second. So, I mean that's the take I have, but. So let's say, okay, then I think this may help you, and then you can, critique my specific view. So there's the first resurrection. You have a generality to it. Blessed is he, and blessed and holy is he who takes part in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power. Sorry, I'm a little all over the place in between, not on actually what I'm saying, but so then I think the resurrection that's after the 1,000 years and the rest of the dead, there's that language again, the rest of the dead did not, actually it ties it to the first resurrection. It says did not come to life until the 1,000 years are completed. So then there's that's like a triple quadruple sequential point that's the author is trying to make. So having said that, I don't see where what you actually mean by visible or invisible. Like I don't understand how that plays in as far as the second resurrection.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to get sort of your take on that. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Toby.
So I think let's pick up on some themes here. So I'll probably start with the heaven and earth bit, which quite rightly it doesn't necessarily negate whether or not it's premillennium or postmillennialism or whatever. It's all about the fact, and you've used the word terrestrial, which I think is a good word to use. So the fact is, it's all happening on Earth. God created the Earth. He wanted to do everything here. The resurrection is physical. People really are going to rise from the dead and actually get real new bodies. We read that in 1 Corinthians 15, etc. So I'll probably go with the invisible resurrection. If we were going to use that term, you could tie to the new birth that happens when you believe in Jesus and you get baptized. You partake in the resurrection of Jesus. You are saying, I have died to my old life and I now live to Christ, and I'm taking part in his reresurrection.
But it has.
But again, that is.
Let me say that real quick. But it has a limit, so you can just think about that. I would think that it has a limit to how far you can take that. that is a resurrection, because you have to show from the context and some intertextuality why the writer means that when he says the first resurrection, and then you have all these other things specifically tied to the first resurrection. You have to show the rule that says that's how you interpret it, or you have to show a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think the problem comes when you look at where all of this historically is based, and it's based in the Jewish expectation. So the Jewish expectation, they had searched the scriptures, they had come to these conclusions, which includes things like the resurrection of the dead, which comes from Ezekiel 37. That's what they were expecting. So they were expecting a one-time final resurrection of all of the believing Jews. So by Jesus coming in ahead of time, that changes what the expectation could be, because Jesus rose outside of the timeline. The expectation is the resurrection happens at the end, and now Jesus has risen in the middle. So then there's the tension between the final resurrection of all those that are in Christ, and the first resurrection, if we can call it that, which is the prototype. It's the first fruits. It's the place where we could say that new creation has begun. This is the sign that the resurrection will happen, because I have resurrected now. And when Paul talks about the resurrection, he talks about partaking in that resurrection in the full expectation that we will rise.
But
so
not only that one.
Yes.
Oh, but and so what I would say to that is like it's hard to find where we disagree, because it's like we agree and then there's this little point, then we agree and there's this little point. But I think it's pretty sound and true to say that what the Jews did not see, even if it's in their scriptures, and they definitely did not account for, because they were just blown away. You can read all through the Gospels where it was hidden from them and they did not understand. Is it at this time you will restore the kingdom? But they didn't have and this is where I talk about the rule thing, where that it's like okay, that's a possibility, but definitely in this context is the resurrection of the Gentiles. So that and that being bodily, and then you'd have to look at the associations with the Gentiles that are included in the resurrection. Do you see anywhere where the resurrection is used and directly tied to the internal spiritual resurrection? And I don't know of any of them in the New Testament. I just know of the mentions of resurrection being associated with, like I said, terrestrial, bodily, and the Gentiles. And also, I mean, this is maybe a moot point, but I don't think it's needed either, because I think it's established that internal resurrection, recreation, new birth, what you would call it. And just so y'all know, I do not take the pre-tribulation rapture position at all. I firmly believe that 1 Thessalonians 4 that everybody uses to try to say the pre-tribulation rapture, I think that is, and it has to be, the resurrection. I think it's I don't know, maybe that helps with y'all understanding my view or whatever, but not to take it off of the back not to take it off the thing about the resurrection being synonymous with the new birth.
So I was thinking of something else that would be interesting, is maybe having you guys discuss the meaning of Jesus saying that, in Matthew 24, that this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled, and kind of maybe get some clarity on that, or, if you guys want to maybe discuss that.
I don't have to go first.
Maybe, Dale, do you want to go first? It's harder when you're not on video, so I want to make sure
that you forget about me.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, this is a problem, well-known problem. No, I think it's called the delay of the parousia, their second coming, in scholarship circles and that sort of thing. And it's one that puzzled me as well for a while. So I think the best answer that I've seen to that is that it's based on contextual ambiguity. And the way to kind of show that this is the case, that it's not meaning this literally, that within this generation, literally the end will come, is not by softening the problem, but by sharpening it. So I don't have the Bible reference in front of me. I can't find it in my notes, but there's a Bible verse where Jesus sends out the 12 apostles to go, or disciples at that time, to go preach and that sort of thing. And he says something to the effect that the end will come before you guys finish that. So
Can I say that verse real quick?
Yeah, please.
You not finish going through the towns of Israel until the Son of Man comes, all the towns of Israel. And then you have a very similar passage where he's saying, some of you standing here will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And the answer is Matthew 28. He comes before them in the resurrected state. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And there it is. There's he is in his kingdom.
Gotcha. Yeah, perfect.
Anyways.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing the verse there. Sorry that I didn't know it, but yeah, it's exactly. He's taking this text from somebody else and into his context. So kind of out of context where Jesus said those words in the original gospel, and then this gospel, he's kind of combining them in this context of sending out the 12 apostles. So yeah, that kind of shows that it's problematic to take that literally. Obviously, the gospel writers knew that the resurrection and state didn't come about after the 12 apostles were sent out to preach in Jerusalem and that sort of thing. So I think we can apply that reasoning to these verses as well. That's my take.
Okay, so we're getting kind of short on time. We had about 5 more minutes. You guys want to go ahead and go to the 3-minute closings?
I don't. If we just want to have a couple more questions, or if any of the other brothers want to say, what about this? It don't matter to me. Or we can do that. So I'm open.
Okay, so go ahead, please.
I just thought I'd weigh in a bit with the Matthew 24. I can't say that I mean, a lot of these passages are tough, which is why it's fun to talk about it. I think here's something that might help with how I've been reading scriptures, is that I don't think Jesus believed in an end of the world. I don't think he was looking for that.
You had to open up that huge can.
There was the end of the world theology is trying to say we're going, at some point the world is going to finish and then it's all going to be okay, right? Whereas Jesus talked a lot about the resurrection of the dead and how everything is going to be put right, and we've got the new creation, which means the end of the world is not the same as how we might think about it in today's context and a lot of the kind of stories that we get told. So putting that framework then into something like Matthew 24, where
exactly
in one sense, right, he's already set himself up as the temple over against the physical temple. He's saying, I'm the temple now. There isn't going to be, the temple needs to be destroyed, and abomination, desolation, that's all going to happen. I believe that was AD 70. I believe that's when the Romans set up a number of abominations, as it were, on the temple site to say, look, the temple's been destroyed and we are the Romans, and that was fulfilled there. But I think that what you can see within Matthew 24 is what Jesus is thinking about from the Daniel 7 passage, which is essentially looking at how this, and I'm going to introduce a couple of other terms, this kind of righteous remnant, this few that have been faithful through the generations, these people that have been holding fast to the Jewish law and been faithful to God, to mean that they are going to be the ones that are going to be redeemed from exile. They're going to be rescued and be sent home. And they're thinking of Exodus, which is that they will be released. They will return home to that particular place. They'll be released from bondage. And so they're thinking of this righteous remnant, the truly faithful, where, because heaven and earth aren't seen as two opposing forces, as it were, but they're actually intersecting with one another, and that actually what heaven does, what you can see heaven is doing in Daniel 7 is it's actually dictating everything that's going on on the earth. It dictates who's going to be on the throne on the earth. So if you were to ask Jews in Jesus' day, who is the beast from Daniel 7, they would have said Rome. And so they were looking for Rome to be defeated. And so when you see how Jesus finally dealt with the pagan powers of Rome and then ultimately under that, he wasn't actually dealing. Rome represents that beast, which is actually the underlying forces of evil, Satan, and so on, the power of sin. What you see is, because they're understanding Rome as the pagan power, that they want that power that is unrighteously oppressing the Jewish people, they need that to be dealt with. When Jesus then says, as you said, actually, Justin, when Jesus says at the end of Matthew, all authority has been given to me, that's actually a direct quote of Daniel 7:14. And what he does is he brings the prophecies of Daniel 7 into himself to say he is the Son of Man who has come on the clouds. So that coming on the clouds isn't going away, but actually taking his place on the throne, the Davidic throne, to say, I am now going to rule over the world from my heavenly throne. And then that destroys, obviously there's a physical pagan nation that they were looking to destroy, but actually it's the destroying of the evil powers underneath that then were brought about by his death and resurrection. So I think that's how I would see that.
And I would say that's what you just described, especially at the end, is phase one, the already but not yet, because I definitely believe that there's just like you said, everything you said, but there's also a physical terrestrial, I force myself into using that so much, terrestrial removal of the enemy nations against those of faith, which will include all of ethnic Israel eventually.
That sounds good. I mean, this has been super interesting and very informing, because this is an area that, I'm kind of agnostic on, because it's something that I really want to get into and start learning. So with that, I guess we'll go ahead and transition to the 3-minute closings. We'll start with you, Justin.
Just for mine, just real quick, I would just, I don't think there's any need for me. I know how I can get sometimes, and David might know too. There's no need to try to be like, try to put the hammer down at the end, which I've been known to try to do. But only thing I would say is I would just use this last few minutes or two to say this generation thing that I think I'll be the first to admit to you. I'm confident about the other reasons that I partially went into why it can't be, kind of what I forgot his name. Sorry, I'm just out of it right now. The invisible guy, what he said about the
he doesn't matter. Don't worry about it.
the intertextuality, or about the word he used. I don't know which one's right. They're both valid words. With this generation, that there's too many things that don't allow it to mean everything was fulfilled in that generation. Now, what I will admit is I tried, because I started getting into that a little bit more right before I had the debate with Cody, and then I had the debate with the guy, the full preterist guy. But I'm not that strong on it. But from what I can see so far, it has to do with the Deuteronomy and the curses, and there's language in different spots where it's referring to an unbelieving, rebellious generation, and it's not meant to mean this specific generation of these people. So, and then of course we don't have time to go into it and try to defend it and all that stuff. But that's the last thing I'll say.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all.
All right, thanks, Justin. I appreciate it. So, Toby, I guess we'll go ahead and give it to you for a 3-minute closing.
Sure. So I think it's been really useful kind of hearing where there's a lot of overlap, I think, and then there's divergence when you start to say, well, here's some things that I would say are, for example, I would say, I think Revelation is very literal, only it's literally happening in heaven, which means that you can't describe that in earthly terms. So John has chosen to use language that his churches would understand, which means we don't. because we live, 2,000 years outside of that, and so we have to kind of get into his mind to what he was trying to say on earth. So I think that when I read a lot of these passages, the apocalyptic books, what you see is this is describing very tentatively what's happening in a place that we cannot yet perceive, and we will only perceive when we get our full resurrection bodies, and then we'll see a lot of stuff. I'd say that it's more useful to see these passages as having been fulfilled, because I think that's how Jesus would have seen it, because he was looking at the cross as the ultimate moment where he was taking his throne. He wasn't kind of, there is a now and not yet about it. And I think we are not, and maybe I need to put my hands up and say, maybe I'm making this claim. We're not in a position to say what is now and what's not yet, but I do believe that we're called as believers who want to bring in the kingdom of God to try to bring as much now as possible. And if he says no, that's fine, but that's up to him. But we shouldn't kind of go, well, there's not enough, not yet. So let's not let that happen.
Well, it just depends on what it is that's in the not yet.
Yeah.
I would say.
And I think that's that tension of kind of going, well, here's everything. And I would say that the achievement of Jesus as the Jewish Messiah on the cross, taking on the powers of evil, defeating the pagan nations and the powers behind them, and ultimately setting himself up on the throne to mean that all nations now are at the mercy of Christ. You can see passages like where Paul says we must submit to the authorities they've been given governmental power. You can see that in a new light, because Jesus is already on the throne, and it helps to make sure that we're not seeing that Jesus didn't achieve as much as he did because he achieved so much on the cross. And I think that's probably where I'll land, is to say that I don't think we fully understand how much he achieved on the cross, and that's where I would try to land it, and interpreting that moment on the cross of how much he was able to achieve can change how we perceive a lot of what's written in the New Testament and the Old Testament around eschatology.
All right, sounds good, Toby. Thank you, appreciate it. And so, Dale, we're going to give it to you for a 3-minute closing.
All right, so yeah, I just want to say again, thank you so much for having me on to do this topic. It was great. Thanks to the two guests as well. I learned a lot from them in the 1 hour that we had here. This topic, eschatology, is very important. Even though I haven't taken a lot of time to do it, it's obviously an essential belief. Jesus' second coming is our hope. It's the reason why we are Christians. We're looking forward to him coming again and conquering sin and everything like that. So yeah, these are very important issues. I think if anything else comes from my view, I think that the classical view is probably the best in terms of those 4 elements that I laid out to remember. So, the second coming of Christ, it's going to be a personal coming, and it's singular and visible. That's a bit controversial to the other ones, but that's what I think on the classical view. The return of Christ will be glorious. It will be a decisive event, as per 1 Corinthians 15. And it'll be a sudden and unexpected event. So those are the 4 elements that I'm pretty confident about, given my research there, to remember. And yeah, if you're interested in learning more, just for the sake of the audience, there was a great conversation that I looked at between all the views called An Evening of Eschatology. It was put on by John Piper at Bethlehem College and Seminary. And they had a roundtable discussion with Jim Hamilton, Sam Storms, and Douglas Wilson, just like what we're doing. And they go into a lot of detail about the various positions and reasons for them on all of this stuff. So yeah, maybe I'll put a link in the comments for the audience there. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
All right, thanks. And I would really like to thank Justin, Toby, and Dale for coming on. I really appreciate it. I think this is a really good and informative. I know we didn't have too long, but I think it was really good to kind of lay these views out and kind of see how they compare and contrast and even overlap with each other. And so, yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for coming on. And on behalf of David and myself, we will see you next time.